Forecasting. Suppose you run a business that is either providing a service or producing a product for a market that has demand for your product or your service, your customers. Suppose that you are producing a product that is time consuming to produce. That means that you cannot produce that product right away when the customer asks for it. So this is generally the case because you have to put your product in inventory. That's generally the case, so that when there is a demand for it, you ship it to the customer, or you would ship it actually to the market. You should ship it to stores, retailer stores. So basically, you have to produce in advance for the demand in the future. Right? For example, right now is August. So you are producing and putting in inventory or shipping to the retailer stores and stores for the demand in the next months, or it can be quarters. So that basically means that you have to know about the demand in the future, because there are supplies, whatever you produce or provide to the market, and there's a demand, which is the real demand for your product or your service. And there are two scenarios, plus an ideal scenario. One scenario is that you produce or provide more than the demand. That means that you have a surplus. You have produced a product, but it's not going to be sold. So that's waste. You want to minimize that, right? Or it could be that you provide the service, the level of service or the level of product that you have produced doesn't meet the demand. The supply is less than the demand. So there is a shortage. That means that there are customers who are going to be disappointed. They're not going to get the product or the service that they wanted. So that can actually hurt your business, right? Or it can be just loss of opportunity. So you don't want to do that. What you want to do is to meet the demand, supply meet the demand, which is an ideal scenario. It's almost never going to happen, but you wish that you could actually get close to it, right? Minimizing the shortage, minimizing the surplus. That's why we study forecasting. Forecasting is about predicting a level of variable in the future. For example, predicting the demand in July when we are in June, or when we are in May or April, sometime in the future. So in this chapter, we're going to learn about forecasting. We're going to learn about the definition of forecasting, about the characteristics of forecasting, about the steps to make a forecast. We're going to learn about a variety of forecasting methods, and also we're going to learn about some metrics to measure the accuracy of forecasting, because you're going to learn that forecasting are usually wrong. That doesn't mean that we're going to throw them away. That means that we have to be careful when we use them and interpret them. Okay. All right. So hope that you learn a lot from this chapter, and you enjoy the examples and the problem that we're going to solve. The learning objectives for this chapter is to learn about forecasting in general, its definition, and also the common features of all forecasting. We're going to learn about why forecasting are generally wrong, and what does it mean? Should we throw them away? Of course not. We're going to use them. But how should we fix that? Or in how much we can actually fix that? We're also going to learn about the characteristics and elements of a good forecasting method, and also about the forecasting process and its step. We're going to also learn about a set of forecasting techniques, such as the naive method, the moving average method, the weighted moving average method, exponential smoothing, linear trend, and also regression approaches. We're also going to learn about the time series and the characteristic of time series. For example, seasonality, circles, and trends. Also, we're gonna learn about how to measure the accuracy of forecasting. So we're gonna learn about the forecasting techniques, and based on that, when you apply, for example, a set of different forecasting methods for your problem, then you're gonna be able to pick the one that is more accurate. In this lecture, we're going to answer three main questions. First is, what is forecast? What do we mean by forecasting and predicting? And also, we usually make forecasts for what? What are the characteristics of the thing that we make forecasts for? And also, why do we use forecasting? The first and foremost question to answer here is, what is a forecast? Forecasting or predicting is a statement about the future value of a variable, depending on the problem that you're talking about. We make forecasts about variables such as weather, right? That's what you see almost every night in TV. And also, for example, demand, where you talk about a business, and also, for example, resource availability. Forecasts are important to making informed decisions. For example, in case of a business, it would help the business owner and the production and the operation of the business if they know the level of the demand for their product or their services. Or, for example, it would help you to make a better plan or generate plan for your weekend if you knew in advance the weather forecast for the weekends in advance, so you could actually have proper planning. Forecasting time horizon. There are three main forecasting time horizon. You have the short range forecasting time horizon, which is generally anything less than 3 months is considered short range. It's immediate future. An example of a type of problem that would require a short range time horizon for forecasting is inventory replenishment. Next, we have the medium range time horizon for forecasting. So it's typically between 3 months, several months, to a year. It's less than a year. Greater than 3 months, less than a year. A type of problem, for example, that would require a medium range time horizon for forecasting is production planning. Uh, how many product you want to plan or to produce within a year, for example, or within a couple of months. So that's a medium range type of problem for forecasting. Next, we have the long range time horizon. So these are typically more than 1 year, couple of years, for example. An example of a type of problem that would require a long range time horizon for forecasting is product design. So it's like because it's a long time horizon, it's a strategic decision that you have to make. So it makes sense that the designing the product would be one example here. Because when you design a product, you want to produce that product, for example, for a little while, for example, for a couple of years or more than a year. An example of this would be, for example, the iPhones or the smartphones that companies produce, either Galaxy from Samsung or iPhone from Apple or other manufacturer. When we want to make a forecast, it's important to consider that there are two important aspects in forecasting. One is the nature of the variability in the variable that you want to make a forecast for. For example, if you are making a forecast for demand, then the expected level of demand, the variability in the demand, may be a function of some structural variation, such as what is called as a trend or seasonal variation or random variation or irregular variation that we're going to talk about later on. knowing and understanding this variation and the sources of variation would actually help us a lot to be able to set the level of expectation for the accuracy of the forecast, and also to, for example, use a proper forecasting method and what to do to make the forecast better. And the other aspects of forecasting is the accuracy. As we said earlier, forecasts are generally wrong. So when you want to use a forecasting method or forecast general, you need to know how off the result or the output of the forecast is. We know that it's wrong, but how off is it? How wrong is it? So that's the level of accuracy, basically, or the potential size of the forecasting error. The application of forecasting or forecast uses. Basically, there are two main applications for forecasting, which are different based on the time horizon or how far in the future you make the forecast for. The first one is planning the system, which is basically a long-term decision making, or as they call it, a strategic decision making. Let's say an example. Suppose that Apple wants to build a new facility to produce iPhones. So first it comes to, where should they locate this facility? Where should it be? This is a strategic and long-term effect, right? You cannot move it after you build it. You cannot move the facility. Also, when you build a facility and buy the equipment and machineries, you have to buy the machineries that for the specific iPhone that you want to produce. So because there are different types of iPhone. So you need to know what type of iPhone you want to produce, or what type of product you want to produce. So that's another thing to know. And also the number and the type of equipment that you need to have, because after you have it, you purchase them, it's there. You cannot change it. You can purchase new one and retire these, but so it's basically a long time horizon and strategic decision making. Then the next use of forecast is a shorter time horizon decision making, which is planning the system that is already built. So planning the use of the system. So that's generally involved a shorter and medium range planning in the system. So for example, you know what type of, you already have the facility, you already have the equipment, and you know what type of iPhone or type of product you want to produce. Then it comes to the how many you want to produce. So that's shorter term. For example, how many should you produce in the first quarter, or how many should you produce certain type of iPhone in, for example, a season or a year, right? So that's a shorter time horizon that's going to change. You can actually produce X level of iPhone at say the first quarter, and Y level of that iPhone at the second quarter. So that's something that you can change it. And also, based on knowing the demand for that specific season or that short time horizon or medium-sized time horizon, you can actually also acquire or employ the workforce that you need. The level of workforce is another planning the use of the system. And also, how many equipment, how many actually materials do you need to, raw materials you need to purchase to produce that demand that you predicted. So that's going to be production level, purchase level, and also budgeting and scheduling for production and scheduling for the use of your workforce. So that's the second use of forecasting. Features common to all forecasting methods. Although forecasting methods can be different from each other, as we're going to learn, but there are some common features to all forecasts. For example, all forecasting techniques assume that there are some underlying causal system, there is a pattern that existed in the past, and we expect that, or we assume that that pattern is going to persist and continue into the future. That's the baseline that we use this nature of pattern, persistent of this pattern, that we claim that we can actually make a forecast or make a prediction. Otherwise, we would not be able to do that at all. Next is the next feature, common feature, is that forecasts are not perfect. Well, not only forecasts are not perfect, they are far from it. They are all wrong. They are inaccurate, but that doesn't mean that they are useless. We can still use them with caution. And also the level of inaccuracy or errorness for them is different. Next is that when you make a forecast for a group of items, generally it is more accurate than when you make the forecast for individual items. The next common feature for all forecasting techniques is that when you make a forecast for further in future, when your time horizon increases, your accuracy of your forecast decreases. So there is an opposite relationship between the time horizon that you make the forecast for and the accuracy of a score or the accuracy of your forecast. So the further you want to make the further in future you want to make the forecast for, the less accurate your forecast will be. Forecasts are not perfect. Well, forecasts are wrong. The reason that we claim that we can make a forecast is that we assume there is a pattern, there is some structure of resources for the pattern or the causal of the variation in whatever you study, for example, the demand or any other variable that you study. So that pattern, we assume that is going to continue into the future. But not all sources of variation comes from these structural or known variation sources. Some of them are random, some of them are irregular, as we talked about it before. So that means that although we assume the pattern is going to continue, but there is going to be some variation, some level of variation that we cannot predict accurately. So because of this nature, because of this randomness nature of these variables, we can't really accurately make a forecast for that variable. For example, the economists could not predict the 2008 global financial crisis. The Nobel Prize laureates, all those big scientists, famous scientists, all those intellectual and the smartest people in the world, the Ivy Leagues, Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, none of them could actually predict the 2008 global financial crisis. The elements of good forecast. So anyone who wants to make a forecast, of course, want to make a good forecast. You may be wondering, what are the elements of a good forecast? A good forecast must be timely. What does it mean? It means that usually the changes to make, to implement the changes to a system, it takes time. It takes certain amount of time to respond to the information that is in the forecasting. So a good forecast should consider that the time horizon that is necessary to implement the changes. A good forecast should be accurate. That means that every forecast should come with its accuracy level or and the degree of accuracy. So when someone gives you a forecast, make a prediction, it also should provide you with the level of the accuracy of the forecast. Otherwise, it's useless. A good forecast should be reliable. That means it should work consistently. It shouldn't be like it works sometimes good, sometimes bad. It should be reliable. A good forecast should also be expressed in meaningful units. It should have a units. A good forecast should be in writing. A good forecast also should be simple to understand and implement. And also it should be cost effective. The benefits of implementing the forecast should outweigh the cost of the forecast, whatever the cost is. Right, so we want to make a forecast. What are the steps to make a forecast? What are the process? First, you need to determine the purpose of the forecast. What is the goal that you want to achieve making a forecast? That should be determined. Then the next step is to determine the time horizon. How far in the future you want to make the forecast for? What is your time horizon? That is very important to know. The next step after that is to work with data. You need the data to make the forecast. Every forecast needs data. So you need to obtain data, clean it, and analyze the data that you have. After that steps, you need to pick a forecasting method, a forecasting technique. Which forecasting technique do you want to use to implement? Because forecasting techniques are different. They have different accuracy level as well, and they work differently. After you pick your forecasting technique, you have your data, you have your time horizon, you know what you want to do with it. So you just make the forecast. You make the forecast and you get your result back. It's going to tell you the prediction that you make for the specific variable that you're interested in the time horizon that you have picked. Then you need to figure out the accuracy of your forecast. So you're going to work with your data to have the accuracy, because every forecast that you make should come with the accuracy degree or accuracy level. So you need to monitor the forecast errors that you have so that you can actually revise it. You make it better. You can improve it. Or you can actually imply and apply the result of the forecast.